Good morning. Good morning and welcome, class of 2019, family members, colleagues sharing the stage with me, to our entering students. I hope this is the most exciting day of your lives so far. And to the parents and other family members joining us today, I hope this day is your proudest so far. Toward the end of June, I began to consider this address, and I was meditating on what I might say about the joys and challenges that Yale will inevitably produce for you. Without warning, I found myself shocked by events in which I had not participated and over which I had no control. This happens more often than you would think. In the weeks that followed, Dean Holloway and I realized that we could and should bring before you a quite particular aspect of the Yale College experience, both because we want to open a campus conversation about it and because we saw no better time than now for you to begin using your intellectual capacity to address complex and substantive issues that concern an entire community. Like everyone else here, I was confronted earlier this summer by a horrifying massacre in a Charleston, South Carolina church. A house of worship founded nearly 200 years ago by slaves praying for their freedom. On a warm summer evening, 9 African Americans were gunned down by a 21-year-old white man with a history of ranting in public about white supremacy. A man whom an hour earlier the congregants had welcomed into their Bible study. That evening, the killer participated in prayer and discussion, and then he stood up, argued about scripture, made racist statements, removed a .45 caliber handgun from his backpack, and began shooting at others in the room. He reloaded his gun 5 times and fired dozens of shots. He also appears to have posted a vile manifesto on the internet, along with photographs of himself posing with the Confederate battle flag. In the days that followed, the nation heard Barack Obama deliver a eulogy that could rank as one of the most powerful addresses of his presidency. Many of us wept as we listened to family members of the victims forgive the deranged killer of their loved ones. And we saw the people of South Carolina consumed with an examination of how signs and symbols of the Confederate past had abruptly and inescapably become questions about the present. Widespread public discussion resulted in the removal of a Confederate battle flag that had long flown over the state capitol. Similar discussions began regarding a battle flag incorporated into the Alabama state seal, the use of the battle flag in everything from rock concerts to street parades, and the status of various other memorials and symbols of the Old South. But what does this have to do with Yale and with you and me? Well, as the events in South Carolina shook the nation, many members of our own community could not avoid considering a matter that ties us here in New Haven to similar questions of history, naming, symbols, and narrative. Our residential colleges at Yale, into which you are being inducted this weekend, constitute one of our most cherished means of fostering an unusually close sense of community among undergraduates. About 1 in 12 of you has been assigned to Calhoun College, named when the college system was instituted in the 1930s for John C. Calhoun, a graduate of Yale in the class of 1804. He achieved extremely high prominence in the 19th century as a notable political theorist, a vice president to 2 different U.S. presidents, a Secretary of War and of State, and a congressman and senator representing South Carolina. Calhoun died a decade before the outbreak of the American Civil War, and so he did not take part directly in the politics of secession and the breakup of the original Union. However, historians have long recognized that the secessionists of the time rested much of their thinking on Calhoun's political theory of nullification. Moreover, and what is more relevant to the concerns of the moment, Calhoun mounted the most powerful and influential defense of his day for slavery. In fact, he believed that the highest forms of civilization depend on involuntary servitude. Not only that, but he also believed that the races he thought to be inferior, black people in particular, ought to be subjected to it for the sake of their own best interests. I'm not exaggerating. In a famous speech on the floor of the United States Senate in 1837, Calhoun said, "I hold that in the present state of civilization, where 2 races of different origin and distinguished by color and other physical differences, as well as intellectual, are brought together, the relation now existing in the slaveholding states between the 2 is instead of an evil, a good, a positive good." A year later, in another Senate speech, he noted, "Many in the South once believed that slavery was a moral and political evil. That folly and delusion are gone. We see it now in its true light and regard it as the most safe and stable basis for free institutions in the world." Moreover, Calhoun never wavered in these views. Considering his life a few years before he died, he wrote, "In looking back, I see nothing to regret and little to correct." So, it was not surprising that within a short time of the massacre and subsequent debate in South Carolina, we found that the issues of honoring, naming, and remembering that have occasionally surfaced regarding Calhoun College returned to challenge us again. The Yale Daily News launched a forum that has drawn impassioned comments on all sides. Alumni and faculty have written to me and to Dean Holloway from varying perspectives, some at length and with considerable force. And inevitably, we found ourselves wondering, and not for the first time, how best to address the undeniable challenges associated with the fact that Calhoun's name graces a residential community in Yale College, an institution where, above all, we prize both the spirit and reality of full inclusion. So, in the first moment of hearing all this, and in light of the tragedy in South Carolina this summer, you might be wondering what the challenge here might be. Why not simply hold a meeting of the relevant authorities and decide to rename Calhoun College, thereby sending a clear message that Yale definitively rejects this association with the past history of white supremacy and slavery, and those who attempt to justify it, John C. Calhoun in particular. Things are rarely so simple. You, the freshmen starting Yale today, have arrived at a college that has held a central place in American history for over 300 years. Dean Holloway will soon illustrate for you in his remarks that Yale's ties to the past are complicated and sometimes surprising. They are also entangled with virtually every moral and political controversy the United States has encountered in its history since well before the former colonies became a nation. Our buildings and programs echo with the names of individuals, greater and lesser, who played their part in these controversies. So we must be wary about ways in which we might seek to alter markers of the past for the sake of present purposes. We should consider the dangers, for instance, of judging past figures according to views and standards that evolved and developed after their own times. We also must consider what it means to attempt to efface or distance ourselves from our own history. Some have sought to control our thinking about the past by selectively wiping away its traces, eliminating or softening its inconvenient or unflattering or dangerous elements. Are we better off, perhaps, retaining before us the name and evocative and sometimes brooding presence of Yale graduate John C. Calhoun? He may serve to remind us not only of Yale's complicated and occasionally painful associations with the past, but to enforce in us a sense of our own moral fallibility as we ourselves face questions about the future. We will also be reminded to consider the fact that generations of Yale students have recreated Calhoun College in their own images, just as you will in your own colleges. And these alumni associate its name not with a remote historical figure, but instead with a beloved place, a place where they learn to live, to love, to think, and to imagine. I don't believe that I have the answer to the question of whether we should rename Calhoun College. However, I'm standing before you raising these considerations because I do have a strong mind about two things. The first is that, catalyzed by this summer's events in Charleston and the particulars of John C. Calhoun's life and beliefs, the time has come for us to have a thoughtful and public discussion of what we ought to do. The second is that everyone connected to Yale will have something to contribute to the discussion, whether faculty, staff, students, or alumni, whether historian or philosopher or psychologist, and whether one initially sees the issue as central or peripheral to the way we understand ourselves as a community. But let me be clear with you about what I am proposing and what I'm not proposing. I cherish Yale's traditions and her history, and I do not believe we should undo them motivated solely by events or emotions of the moment. I'm neither championing changing the name of Calhoun, but nor am I arguing for retaining the status quo. The issue is complex, and you will see that there are substantive arguments on both sides. Good people, moral and principled people, can and will disagree about it. I am suggesting, rather, that we should give careful consideration to what criteria we could and should use to change the institutional names and association we have with some particular historical figure, while in the process avoiding renaming exercises to alleviate an entire range of historical grievances or current discomforts. That is, I'm not suggesting that we should reconsider just any name or the use of any symbol that some find offensive. As you know, there'd be no end to that process. But of course, John C. Calhoun is not just any historical figure, nor is the name of Calhoun College just any name. So I'm asking the Yale community, in all its parts, to engage on this matter with the kind of reflective, thorough, and civil consideration that I believe it clearly deserves, without denying free expression to any opinion or to any form of communication. I'm also happy to express my view, which I hope is widely shared, that we can best conduct this conversation in ways that go beyond competing petitions or protests, anonymous blogging, or social media intimidation. We should pursue instead the kind of rational, open discourse that characterizes an intellectual community committed to looks at veritas, to light and truth. If this kind of conversation cannot or does not happen on the campuses of the nation's colleges and universities, then we should be concerned whether it can happen anywhere. And freshmen of the class of 2019, well, you are very new here, both excited and anxious, purposeful and confused, and thinking most immediately about setting up your rooms, taking language exams, and finding your way around campus. Why do we engage you in this issue? It's very simple. You've come to a place that matters in the world of ideas, and for the rest of your lives, you'll be using ideas to wrestle with difficult, many-sided questions. Members of the class of 2019, here is your first hard problem. Welcome to Yale. In a moment, one of Yale's principal scholars of the African American experience, the author of a distinctive memoir on the era of Jim Crow, but also, and not incidentally, the former master of Calhoun College itself, your dean, Jonathan Holloway, will begin our institutional process of reflection. I take as my final words today a part of what President Abraham Lincoln said at the battlefield near Gettysburg. The world will little note, no long remember what we say here, but it can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion, that we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. In using phrases such as the unfinished work and the great task remaining before us, Lincoln reminds us that we always have more to do. As an institution of higher education, what are our obligations with respect to how we represent ourselves to the world and to each other, by virtue of whom we choose to honor and remember? What things contribute to or detract from the accurate remembering of the past and contribute to or detract from our ability to think wisely about the future? As entering Yale students of the class of 2019, what are your obligations to wrest from this place an education that encourages you to question tradition even while honoring it, to chart your own history even while learning from the past, to enter fully into difficult conversations even while respecting contradictory ideas and opinions? I know in the next 4 years you will make progress on figuring this all out. Let's get started today. Let's get started together. Welcome, class.
Provost Pollock, Dean Cooley, Dean Gindler, Secretary Goff-Cruz, Chaplain Kugler, Masters, Deans, and honored guests. Allow me to join President Salovey in wishing you a good morning and welcome. Class of 2019, I'm thrilled to see you here and look forward to getting to know you well in the years ahead. Together, we will add a new chapter to Yale's narrative. It will be a chapter filled with astonishing highs, intense disagreements, controversy, laughter, and I hope an enduring sense of community. To the parents, siblings, aunts, uncles, and grandparents who have done such critical work shaping and raising the students seated before us, thank you. You have a lot for which to be proud this morning. To the students seated before us, I presume that you have thanked your family numerous times for the sacrifices that have brought you here. If not, I expect you to correct that oversight immediately following the assembly. In addition to recognizing your family's contributions, I implore every student to take a few minutes today to reach out to someone from your respective hometowns. Just as Yale coaches, professors, administrators, custodians, conductors, dining hall workers, librarians, and groundskeepers will do everything they can to help you succeed, there are legions of similar people from your communities who have assisted you in your journey here. Thank them. I recognize that each of you has taken an individual path to this place, but now that you are here, you have a group identity as well. You are the class of 2019, after all. But who exactly are you? You hail from across this country and from around the world. Many of you are children of parents who are already Yale alumni. More of you will be the first in your families to graduate from college at all. Most of you went to public school. Nearly half of you are receiving financial aid. All of you are dazzling. These facts are part of your collective narrative at this, the very first page of your Yale story. But what of this place? The place that claims you as its own and hopes that you, in time, will return the favor. What is Yale's narrative? I won't bother going into much present-day detail. I feel safe in my assumption that you've read the brochures and web pages, and that you may even already track our mascot, Handsome Dan, on Instagram. But by being here, you signal that some part of you has already accepted Yale's narrative about pursuing excellence, about mental discipline, about valuing diversity, and about light and truth. And honestly, I believe that narrative is accurate, and that this place is as dazzling as each of you. But has it always been this way? As a historian, I am predisposed to ask if and how things have changed over time. So I wonder, what does Yale's narrative look like when we explore its past? For the next few minutes, I'd like for you to turn to the images that are in your program. A close reading of these images, what we historians call primary sources, will help us reflect upon this place and its history. The images you see are something of a triptych, 3 different paintings of British merchant Elihu Yale that, when brought together, tell a fascinating story. For those who don't already know, Elihu Yale rose to power and accumulated wealth through his leadership in the East India Company. In 1718, Yale received a request to finance a new building for the Collegiate School of Connecticut, a small enterprise founded in 1701 for the training of Congregationalist ministers. Yale sent hundreds of books, a portrait of King George I, and bales of goods that were later sold to finance the building. In short order, the collegiate school was renamed in his honor. I note as an aside that Elihu Yale made that donation because of the effective lobbying of a colonial author named Jeremiah Dummer. What this means is that you probably should not be called Yaleys at all, but rather dummies. But this is a historical problem for another day. As far as we know, there aren't that many paintings of Elihu Yale, and for understandable reasons, Yale University has many, if not all of them. You have in your hand 3 examples of this collection of Elihuiana. As you see, Elihu Yale figures centrally in all 3 images. In the first, Elihu Yale is by himself. Below that, you find him depicted with a servant. And in the reverse, you see him surrounded by similar men of high standing with a young page to their collective left. In all of the paintings, Elihu Yale is wearing and surrounded by sumptuous fabrics. This tells us that he is a man of means. In the 2 paintings on side 1, we see ships in the distance, a reference to the fact that Elihu Yale built his career on trade that navigated the ports in the British Empire. In the second and third paintings, we see an unidentified attendant. Much like the wearing of exquisite clothes suggested, placing a servant in a portrait was an articulation of standing and wealth. But when we look more carefully at these 2 paintings, we notice that in addition to the fine clothes the servant and page are wearing, they also happen to have metal collars and clasps around their necks. What we are seeing in each painting, then, isn't a servant or a page, but a slave. We are fairly certain that Elihu Yale did not own any slaves himself, but there's no doubting the fact that he participated in the slave trade, profiting from the sale of human beings, just as he profited from the sale of so many actual objects that were part of the East India trade empire. As such, Elihu Yale's wealth was linked to a global economy that was deeply, practically inextricably, interwoven with the sale of human beings to other human beings. In fact, when we look at the paintings, it is safe to assume that Elihu Yale was a willing participant in that economy. Since he could have selected anything to represent him in these paintings, we can conclude that he chose to be depicted with enslaved people because he believed this narrative would best signify his wealth, power, and worldliness. This is a difficult story to hear, especially on an occasion of welcoming and celebration. But I share it with you because just as proper histories are unafraid of their darker corners, you should be unafraid to ask difficult questions of this university. Indeed, we expect you to do so. I also share this story because historians understand that the people, places, and things about which we write leave legacies that connect the past to the present in often unsettling ways. By means of example, let's return to the paintings. Their story does not stop in the 18th century when they were created. This fact is confirmed when we consider how this group of portraits has been put to use by the university. Two are in storage, along with the bulk of Yale's vast collections, but one is on display. The first of your three images hangs in the Corporation Room of Woodbridge Hall, the nerve center of the university. That this specific portrait hangs there, however, is fairly recent history. Until 2007, the second painting of Elihu Yale you see in your program insert is what you would have found in the Corporation Room. That year, recognizing that this representation was terribly jarring, whether it was understood in its historical context or not, the university removed the painting. There was no ceremony accompanying this move, no conversation, just the quiet exchange of one portrait for another. Was this the right thing to do? Was this a missed opportunity to ask larger questions about race, representations, economic systems, and specifically empire? To both questions, I answer singular, perhaps. I believe the painting was taken down with the best of intentions, but I'm left still with more questions. Questions not just about the portraits, but also about many of the symbols, names, and legacies that surround us on the campus, many of which may have been instituted with good intentions, who doesn't do what they think is best, but that now clash discordantly with our values and aspirations. Of course, addressing questions of intention, legacy, and belonging is not merely a local challenge. Consider the recent struggles over the Confederate flag and who belongs in the $20 bill. Consider the pointed language about who is legally in this country or not. But addressing these questions also remains a decidedly local challenge. Consider the new and ongoing debate about the title of master, which we use for the heads of our residential colleges. These clashes between the history we inherit and the future we aspire to create are common at Yale as they are across the United States. To be a Yalie is to be an engaged citizen of the university and the world. So these are questions that we need to think through together. What should we do with the artifacts of a past that now offends us? Do we leave them in view to haunt us? If we erase portions of who we are, hiding them from view without engaging them, do we run the risk of self-satisfaction? If we are prepared to change the name of one college, say Calhoun, because of John Calhoun's anti-abolitionism, what are we to do with those named for individuals who also owned slaves, were deeply racist, or whose personal views on any number of issues run counter to our current sensibilities? To be clear, I am not advocating that we change the name of this university. That much is off the table. But these questions lead us to even more questions. Is it possible to simultaneously hold conflicting feelings about a thing and its history? Can we love Yale College and quarrel with the man who gave this place its name? Inevitably, honest and informed debate will yield a range of possibilities about the right way forward. I am certain that my answers may not be the same as many of yours. How should we reconcile them and ourselves? As you answer these questions, you will do well to remember that the Yale community which you have just joined looks radically different in ways that would have been beyond the imagination of the 18-year-old men who in 1965 sat in the same seats you occupy today. Similarly, the Yale of 2065 will be something quite distinct from what your present collective imagination can summon. This place is ever evolving, and this is how it should be at a great university. To do or be otherwise, to remain wed only to tradition, and an incurious determination to keep things the way they are just because, would mean that we have defaulted on our commitment to ask penetrating, potentially destabilizing questions of our known worlds. So, class of 2019, here you are, in a place that has been waiting a long time for you to arrive, a place where you emphatically belong. Whatever your race, religion, wealth, sport, political philosophy, taste in music, whatever your sexuality, your passport's origin, or the number of stamps in your passport, this place is yours, ready for you to make your contribution to it. You have come here at a unique moment when this university engages with questions of its own identity, at a time when national conversations about race have shined a light on social constructions and assumptions that for many, but not for all, have lain dormant for decades, if not centuries. You also bring your own questions about your own identities and what the future holds for you. These big questions will form part of the education that awaits you, even more than problem sets, term papers, or exams. But so will the conversation that begins today, as you write your own story and build your own Yale. This is hard but joyous work, and you embark on it with many others. Joining you are your peers and your professors, the friends you are about to make, and the students who have preceded you. I join you too. Welcome to this work. Welcome to this place. Welcome to Yale.
My beloved Yale family, as we ready ourselves to step out onto new ground in this daunting yet inspiring liminal space of the unknown next, we begin a poignant turn of goodbyes and hellos that invite laughter, tears, discovery, and pride. Let us go forth with deep trust in certain knowledge that love surrounds us, that beauty can surprise us, that light and truth awaits us. On this day and evermore, may all that is holy shine upon us and tenderly bless our every breath. May we go in shalom, in salam, in shanti. May we go in peace. Let us begin.